Welcome to the next segment of the Sage Intacct Construction Inventory Configuration and Workflow Training Series. In this session, we're going to specifically talk about going back into our transaction definitions and configuring them further to enable them for some inventory capabilities. So this is going to be a refresher. We're going to go back in to a lot of things we covered back in the transaction definitions, but now it's going to be from an inventory perspective. And we'll also venture into existing definitions that you may already have that you might need to set some additional features up so that you can do inventory inside those definitions. So let's get right into it. So what we're going to do is, if you remember the initial PowerPoint that the overview session went into, is in some of the later sections, we're going to go in and go through the workflow process. Some through purchasing, some through inventory, and some through order entry. So what we want to do is kind of go in and make sure that those transaction definitions are set up and ready to go so we can go through those workflow processes in later sessions. And that's going to require us to go different places. So it's not just going into inventory and setting up transaction definitions. It's actually going into purchasing, going into order entry, getting those definitions ready based on the workflow process that we're going to have in our system. So I'm going to shrink this down here, and we're going to be in our Intacct instance. And I'm still going to be at the top level when I'm getting into these configurations. So let's start off in the purchasing area. So basically in purchasing under setup, if you can use some existing definitions that are already set up out of the box in Intacct, the easier it'll be to get you through the configuration. In some scenarios, you're going to have to come up and create your own workflow transaction definitions based on your individual company's needs. So inside the setup, in purchasing, under more, there's the transaction definitions. And if you click on it, you'll see a list of the definitions that are already set up in the system. And you could turn on or off display workflows. So if I turn it off, it's just going to show me all of the definitions that I have set up in the system that are activated, active. I can include inactive ones if I want to check this box here. And now you'll notice there's a whole heck of a lot more. I have inactivated some of the ones that I'm not using, and you may have as well. So just to be sure that you don't already have one set up that you need or can use, make sure you check inactive just to kind of get a full visual of everything that's in your system. So the one we're going to talk about today is we're going to get ready for that purchasing workflow in the next session. So we want to make sure we have the definitions set up that'll take us through each of our steps or phases in our inventory process where we're actually ordering stock through a purchase order, receiving that stock, and then issuing or recording the vendor invoice for the material from that order. So in that scenario, you'll see here, I already have 3 set up. I have a purchase orders for stock, I have a receiving function, and I have a vendor stock invoice function. So if you don't see something like this, or you want to call it something else, you can always find one that is set up similar to what you need. So for example, purchase orders, I want to find one already that is a workflow category of order. And you can go into edit here, and you can duplicate it. All right, so if it is similar in setup, you just want to have a different definition for maybe some different posting configurations, different security configurations, or a different form that you use, you can use the duplicate function, and you can create one from this existing configuration. Or if you're starting from scratch, you're just going to click Add, and when you do that, you'll notice it's going to ask you to name it. And what type of template is it? And that's important because that's going to dictate what functions and buttons become available in your process. And use the help here because you can see template type. I can click the question mark and it'll kind of give me, all right, if you use quote, it could be used for a purchase requisition. If you do order, it's a purchase order, invoice, etc. So you can set these up based on the examples here. So I already have one set up, so what we're going to do is we're going to go into it and go through the items that are going to be important, especially for the inventory flow to work correctly. So I'm going to click Edit here, and you may want to have one already set up. So you still want to come back in here and take a look and see if it's ready to go for inventory. So mine is an order template for purchase orders. It's the primary document in this workflow. It's the first document, the primary document. And you could turn it on to enable change orders if you want to do a purchase order change order. In this scenario, we're not going to do that. If somebody wants to order more material, they're just going to create a separate new purchase order. So with a purchase order for stock, you can have a number sequence. You can make it unique just to that definition, no different than what we did in class 4. And in this scenario, I have a purchase order transaction numbering system set up that's just going PO dash next number. Now here's the new section. So down in transaction definitions in the configuration, so the general tab, there's going to be a section called inventory control. So when we post or enter in a purchase order for stock, what, if anything, do you want to happen to the inventory? So we don't want to add it to inventory yet, but if you notice, there's these inventory total drop-down lists. And you can add these on the fly and you can make your own statuses. Some come out of the box. But in this scenario, when I create the purchase order, I want to show it in my inventory as on order. So I can say I have it on order and I want to maintain the quantity and value for this. You can just do quantity, you can just do value. And what is it? Is it an add or a subtract? Well, it's on order. We want to add to the number. So if we ordered 3 widgets and I look at this inventory item, it's going to show that I have 3 on order. Okay. And, you can warn users if item on hand quantity falls below 0. And basically then, what is it? An increase or decrease inventory and billings. So basically this will indicate if the purchasing transaction we treat it as a positive or negative value during project generate invoices process. So you can actually bill off purchase orders if you're doing T&M, which is nice. And warehouse selection method. So how do you want to pick the warehouse? You want to sort it by ID, name, available inventory, or use the default warehouse. So in most cases, it might be use the default warehouse. And then for this purchase order for stock, you can add a default warehouse here. So you might have 2 definitions set up for your different warehouses. So if I'm ordering for the GC warehouse, I might want to go in and enter a purchase order for stock-GC transaction definition. If I want to do it for the residential warehouse, I could, and you can establish multiple default warehouses here. Now, you can always do it all in one and just change it as you go. If you don't, it's not that big a deal, and you're gonna change it as you enter your purchase order, and that's fine too. So let's just say this is the GC default warehouse. And if you remember back in class 4 and the tax class, if you need subtotals, if you need to enable subtotals and set up sales tax here to track sales tax on the PO, you're going to make sure you revisit the training classes for that and get that set up here as well. This one doesn't have that turned on, so we're going to leave it. We're going to leave it like that for now. And then just to recap, and again, when you get down to here, under the accounting, what do you want to happen? Do you want to post transactions? And if so, where? So again, to recap the transaction definitions with dimensions and with a custom book, or a user-defined book, I should say, we do want to post to the general ledger. We're not posting to our accrual book because it's just a purchase order or committed cost, but we're going to post to a commitment book so that we can print out what we've committed or have on order to date for financial reporting if you want to. So that's why this is checked off as general. And again, we went kind of review from the class 4 setup. And in this scenario, we're ordering for stock. We're not going to have any of that construction related stuff with retainage and things like that. So we're just going to turn it on general ledger. And again, this is a recap. Transaction workflow works the same way. All right, can you start this or convert this from something else? Maybe you have a purchase requisition phase 1 that you could turn into purchase orders. then you would say you can base that. But we'll see this in the next definition. So we're going to leave it blank. This is the initial document. If you convert half, let's say you received half of the order, what do you want to happen? Do you want to leave it open until it's fully received? Do you want to close it and create a back order? Or do you want to specifically close the transaction? So you can have it set up however you want here. So for example, in the back order, it can convert to another transaction type, and it will kind of create another back order that you can convert off as well. So in this scenario, we're just going to leave it open. Well, then you have the normal setup that you would on a transaction definition. If you're just going in and editing one that already exists, you most likely already have this set up. But again, just to recap, this is where you can define what purchase order form you want to use in the printed document templates. Maybe you have a different form that shows different information columns that you need when you're ordering for stock versus a construction PO. So you might have a different form here as well. And then as a matter of what is important is this allow editing. So deliver to, return to, but most importantly, deliver to. You always want to make sure, especially on your purchase orders, especially if you have tax, that you have the allow edit buttons checked off here so that during the entry of this PO, you can change where it's delivered to. And so what I like to do is I like to turn these all on just to have them available if I need them. For printing and editing, it doesn't mean you have to. It just gives you more capabilities as you go through here. And then as we go down, you may have additional information. You may turn some of these fields on that maybe you didn't have on before because you want to record more transactions on maybe a schedule for inventory, track dates. And I'll just turn some of these on here and see what they show us. So you can set those up. So far, the biggest difference in the inventory side is filling out this inventory control, deciding on how we want it to default to warehouse, making sure we have GL postings and our taxes for subtotals on there as well. So then, of course, you have the 3 different tabs in addition to the general for your transaction definitions. Posting configuration, because we said we want to post to the GL, the system needs to know, what do you want me to do when we post this? So from the prior session in our inventory items, we linked our items to an inventory GL group. So this is where we're going to come in and say, all right, any item that's linked to material from the GC warehouse is going to debit inventory 1400. And then you could do the same thing, like maybe for material for the other warehouse, maybe you break them out into separate inventory accounts. So you could have another line here that says this one goes to 1401 if it was residential inventory versus GC inventory. In this case, it's the same, so you can also just duplicate that as well. So whether it's in this one or that one, it's always going to post to 1400. And then for your offset entry, you only need one line and you don't need to fill in item GL account groups or warehouses for that. So you just fill out the credit, accounts payable, and then basically it's the offset account. So if you have items that are set up and coded to different item groups, in here, you have to make sure that you have them all listed. So let's say, for example, some of your items are set up as equipment, GC. Even though it's the same account, the only way it gets to this GL account field is if it has a linking here. So even if it's the same account, you have to link all of your different item GL groups. And again, this is no different than anything in class 4 and anything for transaction definitions, regardless inventory or not. So let's leave it at that, set that up like that. And then you just keep going for as many scenarios as you need to set up. Security will be the same as anything in the system. If you only want certain people to be able to enter into that, you can establish security for it. And this is something you may want to do if you have multiple entities, multiple warehouses, maybe multiple purchase order documents needed, you can define by each entity a separate numbering structure. So maybe you have an entity prefix on each of your PO numbers. You can have a separate number structure, and you can have a separate document template form. And again, this is more generic transaction definitions and inventory, but you do want to kind of readdress that at this time. Once you've gone through that, we've created our initial definition. We can click Save. Okay. So then just to kind of go through and recap the next step, what is the next step in the process? Well, once we do the purchase order in the system, it's going to get delivered into the warehouse, and somebody's going to be responsible for receiving those PO items into warehouse. So the next definition you might want to do is create a receiving definition. Call it whatever you want. This one's called PO receiver. I'm going to click edit here on it. And so now we have obviously the same fields that we saw earlier. So this template type is a list. Just click a pick list, shipping, purchasing receivers. And now it's not the primary document because it's going to trigger from the first phase, which is the purchase order. We can have a separate numbering sequence for that. So I have a PO receiving number sequence set up here that's labeled accordingly. So you can set your own PO receiving. Going to inherit the source document number, which is going to mean it's going to inherit the purchase order PO number from the system. And now for inventory, we're going to ask ourselves again, what do we want to happen once we receive it? Well, once we receive it, we have to do two things. Number one, we have it on order. So we want the system now to take it on order, the quantity and value, and reduce it. So subtract it from on order. Okay. And then now that we've received it into the inventory, we do want to show it as on hand as a value inside our inventory. So we want to say on hand, quantity and value, and we want to add it. So it's going to do two things on this function to our inventory values. Okay. And so the same settings apply here. Do you want to use default warehouse? Yeah, we want to use the default warehouse because that's what the PO said we're going to issue it for. So we're going to want to default warehouse that. We don't need the tax stuff set up. We do want to, again, post to general ledger. So now, and we'll get into that in a second. And in this scenario, can this be converted from a prior document? So in this scenario, yeah. We want to be able to convert this from a purchase order for stock. And actually, in this scenario, I have another purchase order transaction definition that I also want to be able to convert it into receiving function. So you can have various transaction definitions all being converted into this doc. So this is the main one we're talking about here. And you just grab it from the list. So that's why this one needs to be set up first. Okay. Once we convert this, we want to close this transaction, right? So once we receive it, even if it's a partial receive, we're closing that receiving ticket because if we get a second receipt, we're going to open a new one. So we want to close this transaction every time in this scenario. Okay, we're going to skip the pricing stuff for now. And we don't really have a document template for this. You might have maybe a document template that you want to print out for your own internal. You can establish a document for that as well. And just like before, I mean, we probably don't need the editing, but I'm going to go ahead and turn it on just to be safe. Why not? And that sets up the first tab. So now, again, we have the general ledger turned on. So what do we want to happen here? Posting. Well, we do want to make a general ledger entry now into our inventory account because we're receiving it into the physical warehouse. So we do want to debit our inventory account to the accrual for this warehouse. And again, if you had, you'd say material and select your different warehouses here. Debit 1,400. Okay. And in this scenario, it's not accounts payable yet because I don't have a vendor invoice in this definition. So we're going to set up another account or some other account, inventory unbilled, or in this case, we have an account set up called inventory payable, which means, hey, this is a payable, it's coming. We just haven't gotten the bill yet on it. So we're going to put it into an inventory payable account in this scenario. And where we define what book it goes to happens in the configuration setup, which we'll take a look at afterwards at the end. So right now, here's the entry we want to happen. Here's the security on that. Do we want to be able to edit it, convert it from a new document or not? And then entity-wise, do I want it maybe a different number sequence based on the entity, and so forth. So all those same scenarios. But the important thing here is the posting, and then what do we want to happen to inventory? Once we're done, we'll click Save. And then in this scenario, our last and final step is, okay, we get the AP vendor bill, and we want to be able to convert that receipt and turn it into an AP vendor invoice. So in this scenario, we're going to hit Edit or Add if you don't have that. This is a template type of invoice. So when we select invoice, it's going to give us some different options down below in the GL. So same flow here, it's not the primary, and it's going to have its own vendor invoice internal sequence. So this is the actual internal numbering inside Intacct. You're still going to have the ability to put in what the vendor bill or vendor invoice number is during workflow, and you'll see that. So what do we want to happen when we get the AP bill in inventory? Well, nothing, because we've already received it in inventory. This is really not a definition that is going to affect inventory at all because it's already done in the receiving function. So that's why all that's blank there. You may have tax information set up, so just consider that in your subtotal. And your transaction posting is a little different here. Because we said it's an AP bill, we do want it to end up over in accounts payable. So when we go into accounts payable, we can see it under AP bill and we can pay it. So what happens is once we post the vendor stock invoice, it's going to post the general ledger and also send it over to accounts payable. So that's what this posting method means. You can't select both, you just say accounts payable, and there's going to be a place to set it up for general ledger. And so you'll see here now, in addition to the normal accrual entries in the system, we also want to do some other things. So we're going to enable additional posting. And if you remember back when we set up the purchase order for stock, we said we want to post it into this committed cost entry. So we need to take it out of that entry once we turn it into a live accrual entry. And that's what this enable additional posting is going to allow us to do. And you'll see that when we get into the posting section next. All right, so down here, a vendor stock invoice, how and what do you want it to be converted from? So we want to be able to convert an AP bill from a purchase order receipt. And maybe you want to convert it directly from a purchase order too. So you might have that scenario where you could get the bill at the same time. You could convert it and have it update inventory as well. But in this scenario, we just want to be able to convert it from receipt. If we haven't received it, we're not putting the bill in the system. Okay. And on a partial conversion, so if you've only been billed for half of the receipt, what do you want to happen? Well, we want to leave it open. We want to be able to apply additional bills against that receipt. So we're going to leave open partial here. You're not really going to have a document template on here. You're not really going to have the need to do any editing at this point, but you can turn this all on if you want to. And now getting with the posting of this, because we set accounts payable, we go back up to the top here and we look at the posting configuration. We're going to have multiple sections here. We're going to have a section that says, all right, on the AP account side, when you post it through to accounts payable, what do you want to happen? So normally you would have it credit accounts payable and debit inventory payable. And if you see here, if you remember, we already posted it to inventory in the GL during the receipt. So we don't want to post it to inventory again. We want to reduce that inventory payable account that we did in the prior definition. If you don't have a receiving function and you want to go right from purchase order to accounts payable bill, and that's when you want to get it into inventory, well, then you would bypass that payable step here. But again, you need every GL group for every item set up in here, or you'll get an error that it's not set up. So this would be your normal accrual entry. It's going to come out of inventory payable and go into accounts payable and then post over to AP bill. In addition to that, if you remember, we put it into that commitment entry when we created the PO. So now we want to take it out of the commitment entry so it shows as not an open commitment anymore. So in this scenario, it's material, it's this warehouse. We want to credit the inventory. Now it's getting a little confusing here because we're using this inventory account, but you have to take a step back and consider that we're going to post this piece to a user-defined book, not our regular accounting accrual book. That's happening here. This is to reverse that initial purchase order entry into the user-defined book, which I'll show you how it maps that next. So in the original entry, we did debit inventory. We did credit accounts payable. Now we want to reverse that here at the same time. All right. Same security information, entity. You can have separate vendor invoice numbers, might be the only thing you do here. Once we click save, now we've completed our process and we're ready to do workflow. One other step, like I said, we have to see where it points and tells the system to use what books in the general ledger so that we're not posting to actual accrual books for some of those entries. So once you have these set up, the last step would be to come into purchasing configuration or whatever module you're in. If you're in order entry, if you're in inventory, it's the same process. And you'll come into configuration here and you'll have a documents configuration tab. So here's where you can make them active or inactive. And here's where you can default how detailed the entries post. So I usually recommend making sure, again, this is we discussed in class 4, keep it at the lowest level as possible, each document, right? You want to post by document. And if you notice, because it's an order, and there's the purchase order, it knows we're not going to post that transaction to the accrual book. We're going to post it to a purchasing journal. And we're going to link it to this journal, commitments journal, which is actually linked to a user-defined book. So that's that initial, all right, we're going to go to this book for purchase order entry. Then when we receive it, there's the PO. We want to receive it really by each document. So I'm going to change that. And we want it going through our inventory journal. And that journal is actually connected to the accrual book. And where you can see that, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate my tab here so we can have both open. Okay, so we're going to come into here and I'm going to go over to the general ledger, the setup. And if I take a look at these journals, so for example, we have user-defined journals and we have accrual journals. So the accrual journals, inventory is an accrual journal. And you can see here, see the book? All of these are linked to the accrual book. Okay. And if I go over to my user-defined books, I have some user-defined books already set up. There's our commitment journal, which is defined to the user-defined book of commitment. So actually, if I go back and take a look at this, yep, that's right. So purchase orders for stock, is linked to the commitments journal, which is, not an accrual book. The receiving is linked to the inventory, which is an accrual book. Okay, and then the same thing. Vendor stock invoices is going to be linked, because it's AP, is always going to be linked through the AP default journal. And then the additional posting, we really, in this scenario, this is set up incorrectly. We want to post it to the commitment journal or to a reversing journal, which is, in this case, they do have a separate one set up for commitment reversal. You don't need one. You can just have it both go to one, but we want this to actually go to the commitment reversal journal. So those two will zero out when that transaction is completed. So this is kind of the last place that needs to be set up to kind of dictate where it goes to in the system. All right. So the same thing would need to happen on the order entry side, on the inventory side. So one of the other definitions we're going to get into is one of the workflow scenarios in the next class is we're going to get into doing some sales orders that pull from inventory. So for example, I have a couple set up here. I have a sales order, quick bill. I have a quote, customer PO, sales order. But what you'll notice here, over here in the inventory effect, you'll notice there's an effect. So when we create a sales invoice, same theory we went through earlier. When we create a sales invoice, we want to, affect inventory. And you can see here there's an on hold function. So if I go back and in my, let's say, quote or customer PO, so once the customer signs off on this or a sales order is created, we want to put that inventory on hold. We don't want somebody else selling it. So you'll see here when that is posted through, we want to add to our on hold so that gets reserved. Okay. And then when the sales invoice is created, right here, we're going to then reduce that on hold and reduce on hand. Okay. So that works on the order entry side. And then it would work on the inventory. Let's say you're not going to do anything. You're going to have inventory issues that need to happen that we don't create purchase orders for. So this is the inventory control section. You have transaction definitions there as well. You should see one in yours called, where is it? Inventory receipt. So this might be where you just come into the system and create a inventory receipt and add to your on hand directly. Okay, so that's what you need to go through is in each of these transaction definitions is make sure that whatever definitions is related to inventory, that the effects are set up the way you want them to handle the system as you're going through the process. So once these inventory transaction definitions are set up and ready to go, we're ready to move on to some workflow entry and test out our definitions. So there's going to be some testing involved. So I'd recommend getting them set up, put some testing through the system. And while you're doing that, you may not want to allow editing and deleting once you go live, but for your testing purposes, make sure you turn those definitions on to edit, allow all, and you'll be able to delete those out after you're done testing them and get rid of the transactions. Okay? So you can go ahead and do that. And then when you're ready to go live, you can turn those policies back to restricted so that somebody can't just delete them if you don't want them to. And that's going to conclude this section of Sage Intacct Construction Inventory for our transaction definition configuration. I look forward to seeing you in the next ones where we're going to go through some workflow scenarios. Thank you.